Good afternoon, and welcome to this week's episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. My name is Ian Fisher, and we are recording this on June 4th, and it has been a difficult week. There is so much happening in the world right now that it can be a real struggle to focus on things like applying to college or scholarships or how to begin a personal essay. And the stresses of the college application process can feel very small when you look at everything that's happening in the world right now. One of the things that I've decided to do in these last few days is to take the time to listen and learn. I'm listening to the Black voices that are telling us that this is nothing new and that things should have changed yesterday. I'm sharing what I learned with my friends who aren't listening, amplifying those voices in new spaces. And because reading and education is such a powerful tool, we've talked about on the podcast many episodes in the past, I've got some great literature lined up. So right now I'm reading So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo, and I plan to read Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad and How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. For me, these are small steps, but they are necessary steps. And I hope that all of our listeners are out there thinking about what steps may be appropriate for them. I think this is a time where we can't stand still. This is a show about college admissions, and we're going to be here every week to continue to support your efforts in the college application process. That's part of our role. But understand that you have time to take a break for this. We've got a lot of time until applications are due. And our episodes will be here. They'll be in the archives. You'll be able to download them, and you can come back and engage with this process when you're ready. Okay, so with that introduction, let's get to the show. This will feel like more of a typical show, but I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge sort of what's happening in the world in advance. So we want to talk a little bit about the process here of selecting a college counselor to work with for your student. And we know that's something that families are thinking about as classes end this month and the college application process starts to pick up speed toward the fall. So joining me today is Erica Blades. She is our Senior Director of Client Services. And Erica is one of the first people that families will talk to when they decide that they're interested in learning more about College Coach. So we thought you might like to meet her. So Erica, thanks a lot for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
I'm really glad to have you here. And I just want to sort of talk a little bit about what families are looking for from counselors. How many calls do you get in a week in terms of new families that are interested in working with us, would you say?
I mean, we're getting a ton a day. I think people are really stressed even more now than ever. You know, this process I think has always been, you know, something that is difficult to navigate. And now with everything that's changing and it's hitting everyone, this isn't just, you know, one piece of the world or just us, it's the worldwide. So, you know, I would say we're getting tons of inquiries a day, say that. But the biggest thing is just understanding kind of the major questions that they're having. I think people are stressed, beyond stress, just with what's happening, you know, in their current situations, never mind trying to think about this. But
right.
I would say more recently, they're starting to come out of it and start to think about it because it's at hand. You know, summer opportunities are changing and testing is changing. I mean, what are you seeing from your students that are kind of some of the big questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that initially, Erica, there were a lot of questions came immediately after the school closures back in March. And so families were just sort of like, what's going to happen? What's the impact going to be? And then I think people started to settle into a little bit of a routine.
Yeah.
But now that we're moving to the end of the school year, and we're having these announcements from the UC that are, you know, changing their testing policy. We're seeing, as of yesterday, Dartmouth was the second Ivy that went test optional officially for the coming year. There are a lot of things that are changing, and I think families are trying to get a grasp on this thing that sort of is evolving constantly. Do you feel like in that context that families are asking the same kinds of questions that they've always been asking when they're looking for college advising, or are their expectations and concerns a little bit different?
I think unfortunately there's been a shift in some of the questions, and I think it's because
Mm.
we're seeing more independent educational consultants, pop up, and it's going in the wrong direction. I think people are trying to figure out, how do you game the system? How can we make this process easier? And for us, it's a very ethical and genuine process, and it should be for each student. So some of the questions that are popping up are, is there a way to make this application process easier? My child's interested in pre-med, should they apply differently? And we all know how we feel about that. I don't know if you want to kind of address that topic a little bit. I don't know if, if you're seeing it, but I'm hearing it, which is unfortunate.
Well, yeah, I think one of the great things about our process is I don't get a lot of those questions because those families have already talked to you.
Right.
And because those families have talked to you and you've said, we don't work that way, they don't often make their way to talk with me. I do think that I think sometimes that there's just a sort of a misconception about what this process kind of looks like. And
Hmm.
even those who are looking to, quote, game the system or figure out a strategy that they can leverage for the best possible option, I think that tends to lead them in the wrong direction.
Absolutely.
Not just in terms of like what's ethical, because it certainly is, but also what's successful. If you're manufacturing sort of a persona for a student that doesn't really fit who that student is, that can be really challenging. Authenticity is one of the biggest pieces of what we do and one of the things that we really champion with our students. And I think the expectation that you can sort of program an approach to this process that will be successful is really the wrong way of thinking
Right.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah, formula pops up quite a bit.
Yeah,
What
that's
is
so
the formula?
it's so
I'm like, well,
interesting.
there is no formula. It's supposed to be unique to your child. And they're like, some people don't hear that, and some people do. I just had a great conversation earlier, and mom totally understood what I was, explaining as to why these choices are specific for her daughter and not, a blanket, these are the things you should do if you want to go to an Ivy. It doesn't work that way.
And it's great to have those conversations, but I wonder, do you get any sense for where that sort of that perspective is coming from? Is it coming from other people within the community where families are saying, I heard from my friends, or this and that, or is it coming from talking to other organizations and then coming to us and reusing the language that other organizations are using? How is this
Yeah.
becoming a part of the conversation?
I would say in the past it was coming from the chatter of parents or
Mhm.
other students and just making it more stressful. So it was just the myths that were happening in town or in their school. I feel like that has shifted. I can tell when somebody's had a conversation with another company
Mhm.
because they're asking similar questions, and they're just not genuine questions. So I'm glad that I'm able to tell them kind of what they should be looking for. We even have a checklist that we've created that's on our website to say these are things you should look for to make sure you find the right person. It may not be us, but we want you to have a great process and find the right person to have support through this process.
Yeah, the parent piece I think was really interesting. I used to kick off some of my calls with families by saying, working with us gives you permission not to listen to the
Right.
parents in your community anymore. So you
Yes.
don't have to worry about that parent grapevine, because if
Yes.
you have a question, you can come here and
Yep.
we'll answer that. And the podcast also helps with that. If you have a question, I'm sure we've talked about it in a past episode, you can come find an answer for that question. That's part of what we want to be able to do here as a part of this program. But I think sometimes parents also just they hear the chatter and they don't quite know what to ask. What are some questions that you feel are really good questions that you get from parents where you say, yeah, you're on the right track, you're asking the right things? Let's help support our listeners if they're thinking about finding an independent counselor to work with. How
You know,
can they find the right one?
Yeah, I think, some of the great questions are just really asking about why us? Why should we even consider you? And
Mhm.
certainly understanding kind of, we've been doing this for a long time, more than 20 years. I think also understanding who you're working with. This is not a bait and switch. Whoever you see on our website, those are our experts. We have 30 experts nationwide, and it's something where we're very strategic on who we bring on. As you know, you have to have that admissions experience, senior level, and understand this process. So it's not just an essay editor or a professor that's done this or a parent that has done this. So I really kind of take a step back and kind of explain who we are as an organization. Having a parent company like Bright Horizons is huge, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
But more experience understanding the landscape, the professional development our team goes through, and how we work as a team, I think is the biggest feature. Knowing that, we have a bigger resource. It's not just one person. And, you can explain how we do the team, but being able to tap, so many unique individuals with such great experience is going to be a huge piece to really figure out fit and matching.
Yeah.
I talk through and learn more about each student to understand who would work well with that student, because personality and style are going to be the biggest assets to a good process.
They are. And that's, I've seen that too. I mean, I think that sometimes families get the impression that where that person worked makes that person the best fit for my kid. And I think what they miss about our team approach is that we share so much information that I have a really good grasp after being here for almost 7 years of how the Ivy admission process works, because I have colleagues who worked in those offices. And so that helps to inform my ability to do that. But there are certain students who would get along much better with me than with one of my colleagues who did have
Yep.
that experience, and vice versa. And so
Yep.
it's more about who do you want to, whose face do you want to see when you're showing up for those meetings, and
Right.
whose style works for you, and how do you sort of make sure that your student is getting the right kind of connection. I wanted to speak to that team approach. I pulled up our team's conversations. Someone just this morning said, what are some colleges that come to mind that have a culturally diverse student body but are outside urban areas? And that's a kind of question that somebody could just ask our team of 30 and get some great responses.
Right
Whereas an
away.
office of one, it's like,
Yep.
gosh, I don't know. How am I going to answer this question? So it's really, really wonderful, I think, to have that team support.
I just want to actually highlight the teams. I've been talking about that, and I think people are getting that even more now, because now that we're all virtual because of this situation, people have heard of Zoom, they have heard of Teams. And when I say our team has an internal team, they're like, that's amazing, because it's instant. You can ask a question, or if something new just popped up, and like you're saying, we just, who we're hearing about is test optional, it's live and everybody's getting it right away.
That's right. And that's a big part of what we do and what we care about. And I think, going back to the other thing that you had said about experience working in admission offices, I think that, some people really prioritize that. Others don't. Obviously, that's something we care about deeply. And I wanted to sort of point out why that matters. I think the reason it matters is because we have a good sense of what should you spend your time focusing on? What are the components of the application where you should really be invested in making this stronger? And what are some things that maybe you don't have to spend hours working on? A great example of this would be a resume, right? So a lot of independents, I think, who haven't worked at admission might say, we've got to polish up your resume. We got to choose the right font. The format's got to be awesome. Let's make sure that it looks really sharp. And when I worked in admission and I saw a resume, I was just like, oh, whatever. I threw it aside, right? Because it wasn't a required portion of the application.
Yep.
And I think that my ability to say to a family, you don't have to worry about that. What's more important is the language you choose and how you put that in the application. That saves them hours of work and stress over a component that's really not helpful in the application process. What are some more things that you're seeing in terms of shifts? I mean, you've been here for a while, Erica. You were here when I started. I think, 10 years that you've been?
Almost, yeah.
Okay. So what have been some changes you've seen over the course of this decade in terms of what people are asking for, how they're engaging with this process? Has there been a noticeable shift, or are most of the questions still the same as they were 10 years ago?
I think the biggest thing has been when families start with us. I think that has changed quite a bit. When I first started here, it was the major, focus was on juniors, rising seniors, because I don't think everybody knew that you should start a process early, or they didn't have the questions. And now I have rising 8th graders, and I think parents are stressing out too early because they're listening to the chatter at school or, with their friends, and just don't know what to do.
Right.
So we're seeing people start earlier, which I think is helpful, just to have that soundboard. Like, they can turn to you and ask you these questions, and you can say that's a fact or that is absolutely not true. And I think that helps on any parent stress level. I mean, my kids are younger and I have questions, and it has nothing to do with where they end up. It's more of peace of mind.
I
So it's
know
a
I've gotten some
question.
of those questions from you, Erica.
I know. And again, my end goal is not, again, but I think some of the conversations, are changing in more close at hand,
Yeah,
with some of the things that I think it's just more independent people popping up and saying they can do certain things, and they're asking us, do we help with, summer opportunities, and making that connection. And that's not what we're here for. I mean, ultimately, you can speak to it more than I can, but we obviously want to make sure we make certain recommendations for opportunities, but the student has to genuinely be interested. How could you apply for a summer program if you have no interest in it and can't speak to it?
that's right.
So why would we edit that essay? That's not what we do. Or, just kind of, I think more of it is just starting to turn in a different direction of just not being genuine and organic for a student, which we know is just not the right path.
Yeah, one of the things I love, we just redesigned our website, and you can go to getintocollege.com to visit it. And right up there at the front is this great tagline. I don't know who came up with it. It was fantastic. It says, your achievements, our expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And what that really reinforces is that we're not pushing you across the line. We're helping you to see the path that's going to be the most effective for you and your family. And we certainly relieve stress. We take a lot of the college conversations that happen at the dinner table and we move them to our offices so that we're having them with the students. I think that that's huge. And we make sure that students are finding the path that's going to be really best for them. So I think it's great. You guys are doing such a wonderful job in client services of helping families to understand what it is that we do, so that when I talk to families, they absolutely have the right mindset. So I think that that's great. Any final tips that you would give to families as they're thinking about this option?
I think the major thing is definitely do your research. I totally feel 100% that you want to find the right person for your child.
Mm-hmm.
That's where success lies. Ultimately, the major piece is background, experience, how they approach the process, and just making sure they have that comfort level. And getting just more information. I think do your due diligence. Don't feel like you can't ask questions. I have families that come to me with, 30 questions and then follow up with 30 more. And that's totally fine. That's what I'm here for. And I think it also helps, like you're saying, by the time a family gets to you, they understand what we do, how we do it, how we help, where we can support. And one other thing I think that has popped up, which I didn't mention, just with some of the things with COVID, and people asking about continuing to show their interest, which I think has also been a hot point, is still being able to show that interest by doing those college visits and tours and signing up, which we didn't get to, but that was another question that came up of, should I apply to 15 to 20 schools? And it's like, how could you possibly show interest at 20 schools? Make sure the process makes sense and you're finding the best fit school. It's not just name, for sure.
That's right. That's right. And the other piece, and we'll talk about later in the radio show, we always have a college finance expert who comes on and talks about a particular portion of our, of the finance landscape. That's another huge piece of what we do here is we've got this deep roster of college finance experts, which I don't know if you ever hear other people that come to you and ask specifically about that, because it's such a rare element of what we have that I think almost nobody else does.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, this has not been like college coach is the best, but we are. But hopefully you've gotten some suggestions for some things that you can ask. And Erica, I want to thank you for coming on to talk about it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Folks, don't go away. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about what to do this summer now that things are a little bit unusual. Stick around.